Hey guys, thanks for connecting with us and joining with us again. I want to start by offering up a question and getting you to kind of think a little bit along with me. What is it that you would say that you personally believe about the current trial that the world has found itself in? And maybe even another layer to that would be this. What do you believe is your role in all of this? What do you believe is the proper response for yourself personally? Because the reality is that trials pop up on us unexpectedly. I mean, it's like a spider in the corner. I mean, it just, you don't see it coming. There's no announcement. There's no trumpet. It just, a trial happens. It lands in our lap, and then we try to figure out after the fact, okay, what am I supposed to be doing with it? And oftentimes our decisions are really just fueled by our emotions and how we feel about it. And it's so important that we learn to take a step back and go, okay, what's the reality of what is taking place, and what's the truth about how I'm supposed to be engaging with this? Because again, trials happen unexpectedly, and we don't see them coming. Even though we know a trial is coming, there's still this sense that when it hits, you're like, wow, I didn't see that. I didn't see that coming. My family was actually on a hike just the other day, and Jackson grabbed a hold of a vine from a tree and swung on it. And I told him, I was like, it's not uncommon for those vines, those branches to break when somebody does that. And I mean, I no sooner got the words out of my mouth than he tried to swing on it again, and it broke. And fortunately, it ended up not being serious, and it was more hilarious than traumatic, so that was good. But even though we know, like I anticipated, hey, there's a good possibility of this happening, it was still even a surprise to me. It still sort of shocked me that it happened. And so even though we know trials are coming, they can still be a shock to us. They can still surprise us and catch us off guard. But what is so important engaging in a trial is, what do you believe about it? You see, because what you believe about it, it determines how you behave. And the way that you behave in a trial is going to determine whether or not you emerge from that trial on the other side of it successfully. And really, that's what we all want, right? We want to endure the trials, whether it's this global one that we're all experiencing or the private ones that I engage in my own life. We want to engage in those things, and we want to come out on the other side of those things being successful and being better off for it. But I want to remind you, and I need the reminder as well, that doesn't happen accidentally. I don't come out of the other side of a trial successful, victorious, excited about what God has done just by kind of like bulldozing my way through it. I have to do it the way that God wants me to. And I want to speak to you for just a few moments to try to encourage your heart as we all do this, as we all wait. Because that's what we're doing. We're waiting. And waiting can be one of the hardest things for a person to do. It can be one of the most difficult things for us to do. We feel it in the small areas in our lives where we maybe have to wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes for something we're looking forward to, or the times where we're waiting weeks and months and sometimes years for a certain thing to come. Waiting can be tough. But I want to look at this man named Joseph in Genesis 37, because what's fantastic about his life is that his belief shaped everything. The way that he felt about God determined his outlook no matter what took place in his life. I want to jump into chapter 37, beginning of verse 1. It says, "And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah and his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report." So this story begins to kind of paint a picture of us, a picture for us of this guy named Joseph. Now, for starters, if you were to dig into his backstory, you're going to find that right off the bat, he's got family problems. I mean, if you remember, so his dad's name is Jacob. Jacob and Esau were the brothers that butted heads over the birthright. And Jacob's parents showed favorites in his life, and so now he's doing the same thing in Joseph's life. So right off the bat, there's tension and there's friction within this household. But by verse 2, we see that Joseph tattled on his brothers for something that he did. Now, there are plenty of times in life where people need to have someone step up and say, hey, what you're doing is wrong, and an authority needs to be told. Now, there's other times where it's like, okay, now you're just being a tattletale and a snitch. We don't really know enough backstory to determine whether or not Joseph did what was right here or what was wrong. But what we do know is that his brothers sure didn't like him for it. Look at verse 3. It says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Can you imagine? Joseph is hated so much by his brothers that it says they couldn't say two words to him without being unkind. It wasn't possible for them to be peaceable or nice to him. So Joseph is Dad's favorite, and he gets this colorful jacket that waves like a flag, just kind of announcing his arrival, announcing just this, rubbing salt in the wound that, hey, Joseph is Dad's favorite. It stood out as this reminder to his brothers. And you have to understand, that's not Joseph's fault, right? That's on Dad. But remember, his parents did the exact same thing. And I've spoken to a lot of teenagers that'll say something like, man, you don't understand, my dad does this, or my mom did that, and there's this blame on the parenting of, how things are going. Listen, I want to challenge you guys to learn to cut your parents some slack. Man, one of the things that I've realized in my own parenting, and that you will, if you're a teen and you grow older, become a parent on your own, you're going to realize that you do tend to repeat the things that were done to you, the way that things were handled in your home. You tend to repeat those things. And so, man, cut parents some slack. You tend to parent in a way that you've seen done before. And so you see that in the life of Joseph. His dad, I'm sure the favoritism thing that he experienced was an issue in his home, and yet he ends up repeating it, unfortunately. And so you end up doing the same thing. So, man, tread gently with that sort of stuff. So Dad plays favorites here, and it causes this major rift in Joseph's relationships with his brothers. And then it says in verse 5, Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, hear, I pray you, for this dream which I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. So he approaches his brothers, and he's like, hey, listen, I had this dream. This is so crazy and wow. Now, they already hate him. And he's like, so I was doing this, and you guys all bowed down to me. Like, isn't that such a really great dream? And, unfortunately for Joseph, wisdom wasn't his strong suit at this point in his life. Like, that probably wasn't the best timing for him to share that dream. And if you go on reading, he actually does it twice. So he's not exactly the wisest as it pertains to all this stuff. But, to make matters worse, he repeats it. And there's been plenty of times in my life where I've looked back on something and gone, wow, I thought that was a good thing to do at the time, but wow, it ended up being really, really stupid. I got to imagine that in Joseph's life, that's sort of where he's at here. Like, my timing on that storytelling probably wasn't as good as it could have been, right? So now you have these elements. You got Joseph as a tattletale. You got dads playing favorite. You got playing favorites. You've got brothers that hate him. You have Joseph kind of announcing his superiority, and then you have his brothers who have this unchecked, unbridled hatred in their hearts. It says in verse 8, and his brethren said unto them, shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. Listen, these elements combine in Joseph's life to really create the perfect storm, where he could have very easily looked at these trials and what they amount to down the road and gone, you know what, this is all somebody else's fault. How in the world did I end up here? And yet Joseph is a model of how to endure a life like this that's been handed to you to some degree, but also maybe some It maybe to some degree it's a result of your own decisions, and handle it in a way that's successful. It says they took him, verse 24, skipping ahead a little bit, verse 24. They took him and they cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty and there was no water in it. I did a little bit of digging, no pun intended, and came to realize this is a well, and a well around this time and in this area, not uncommon for this to be like 20 feet deep. So we're not just talking about he got, kind of shoved into a little, down a ravine or something. I mean, he got really tossed into a hole in the ground that was pretty significant. Undoubtedly injured him on the way down. And so he's, peering up, and you could see sunlight probably coming through the hole in the earth as he's looking out. And undoubtedly he's got to be fearful and wondering what in the world is happening. And this is the beginning of a series of events in his life, a series of trials that would come his way as a result of these things. But there's this opportunity that his brothers have to get rid of him, and they take it. And they toss him into a pit. And after this, it's almost like he's in a holding pattern of waiting. When is this going to be over? When am I going to get through this trial? When are things going to kind of level out and I can get back to life as normal? And I don't know what life looks like for you. Maybe lots of the problems that you have stem from the family that you came from. Maybe a lot of your problems, if not all of them, are due to some things that you've done on your own, like it's a problem of your own making. But I know for all of us, it seems like we often find ourselves in periods of time in our lives where we're waiting for things to change, waiting for things to get better, waiting for things to go back to normal. We all endure seasons of waiting like that, but it's what you're doing during those seasons of waiting that is so incredibly critical to your life. You see, Joseph got thrown into a pit. Man, I want to just kind of share with you real quick, and then we'll be done. 3 pits that you can avoid finding yourself in. 3 pits that if you do fall into them as you go into a trial, have the potential, guys, to significantly wound, if not ruin you. And the first one is this. It's the pit of blame. You see, Joseph could have very easily looked at it and gone, you know what? This aspect, this was Dad's fault. Man, this over here, this was Mom. This over here, this was my brothers. This is all their fault. And he could have pointed the blame to them. It's tough to go through life and not experience those moments where you feel that significant sense of wanting to point the blame at someone, point the finger of blame at someone else. And I get it. Maybe you're watching this and you're going, but you don't understand, Pastor John, it really is this person's fault. Well, so what? And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek. I want you to think about it for a moment. Let's just say that you're in your mind, you're going, this situation is completely this person's fault. Let's say it is. Let's say that you get all of your friends to your side and they agree with you that it's that person's fault. And then maybe that person even says on their own, yeah, this is my fault. Does it really change the circumstances? I mean, the feeling of pain and the brokenheartedness that you're experiencing, even rightly being able to pin the target of blame on somebody, it doesn't change it. But blame is a pit that we fall into, and it's a devastating trap to end up in. All it really does is give you an outlet for bitterness and an outlet for anger. And here's the reality. Have you ever found someone that played the blame game and came out as a winner on the other side? Like, haha, I blamed this person and they took the blame for it. So yeah, that worked out. That always, it's still a wound. It's still, the consequences of those things still linger on our hearts. Listen, Joseph realizes that blaming his brothers really accomplishes nothing. And if nothing else, blaming makes the waiting that much harder and that much worse. Can you imagine sitting in that hole in the ground, just simply blaming his brothers? It would have accomplished nothing. And the second is this, it's the pit of depression. One of the things that I've learned about talking about depression is that everyone filters it through their own perspectives. If even just the mention of the word, so you say it, and it's like if there's 15 people in the room, they're all filtering it in 15 different ways. And I understand we do that with much, if not all of our lives. But here's what I want you to walk away with. Joseph went through extraordinary circumstances that could have very easily crushed even the emotionally strongest of men. And yet, it doesn't crush Joseph. Joseph somehow comes out through these things without experiencing this significant sense of depression, at least not that we see this recorded in Scripture. And I'm not saying he wasn't sad. I'm not saying that there weren't times in his life that he cried himself to sleep at night, wondering what in the world was going on, that he wasn't overcome with emotion. But whatever he did, it worked and it helped. And again, I'm not saying that he acted like nothing was ever wrong, but I am saying that throughout his life, we see a steadfast reliance upon God and a clinging to hope. And I understand feelings and emotions that are out of whack, but holding on to hope is a decision that a person makes, regardless of how they feel. Holding on to hope that God is going to bring you through a difficult time or a trial in your life. And then the third and last pit is the pit of giving in. Man, have you ever seen something or experienced something and you're like, man, you just want to throw up your hands and you're like, well, that's it. I mean, like, we're done. I mean, I've played games like football games before, or a soccer game, and you're like, well, yeah, that last goal, like, that was it. I mean, you're not going to be coming back from that one. Sometimes we do that in life. Sometimes we do that with a problem. Something happens and it's like, well, I mean, that was it. That was the last straw. Forget it. There's no hope to be found here, right? And Joseph could have given up, and he could have given in and given himself over to fear and worry. And I know you probably understand this, but think about it for a moment. Worry is easy. Fear is easy. I was listening to a guy lecture quite a while ago, and it was interesting because he was talking about this idea of fear and anxiety. He's like, do you have any idea of all the things in life that you have to be afraid of? Like all the different ways that you could die at any one time. It's amazing that people have any sort of shred of sanity about them. And yet we do. Worry and fear, they're the most natural responses to life. If something happens that's out of my control, I worry about that. Something happens and my freedoms are taken away, I'm fearful. Listen, I've said this before though. Worry is a prayer to a false God that cannot hear and won't help you. But that's what worry is. It's a going over a problem in our minds repeatedly, just kind of like you're chewing on something over and over again, instead of giving that something to God. Worry, you go over it until it begins to affect your heart and your soul and your body. But I want to leave you with a verse. Psalm 37:7. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. The first section of that verse says, rest and wait. Rest and wait. Listen, when you're overwhelmed, rest in the Lord and learn to wait. We don't like waiting, but Joseph learned to wait. He learned to wait patiently. He learned that waiting was okay. He learned that waiting was a part of the intentional plan of God, although waiting oftentimes doesn't feel like it's part of anybody's plan. It puts us in more of a panic than anything. We begin to immediately think if we have to wait that something is wrong. You put in an order at a fast food restaurant and it goes beyond 10, 15, 20 minutes. What do you think? Something's wrong. Mom goes into Walmart, leaves you in the car, says she'll be back in 5 minutes. If she's longer and we're waiting, we begin to immediately think something's wrong. If you go into a doctor's appointment and the appointment to get our test results back should only take 30 minutes, but it begins to take an hour, we begin to assume something must be wrong. Waiting almost always communicates to us in some way, shape, or form that something is wrong. But what's funny is that on a bigger scale, we don't think that way. Here's what I mean by that. We will sit in the middle of December and nobody gets angry or upset or anxious that it's not warmer, because we recognize that seasons take time. We recognize in the middle of winter that summer's coming, and so we have that hope, but we understand you have to wait through winter before you get there. There is a season to everything in life, and the growth that comes with seasons demands that you wait. When you plant a crop, nobody gets upset and anxious that the day after there's no growth. Why? Because waiting is demanded if there's going to be growth. And guys, your life and my life are the same. So when I look at what's taking place in the world around me, big picture, and then also in my own life, my private life, when I find myself waiting instead of becoming panicky, instead of worrying, I need to learn to recognize that God is doing something in the period of waiting that can't be done otherwise. That God is trying to grow and mature things in me, and those things demand time and they demand waiting. Listen, all the best growth in life that you're going to experience is going to demand that you wait. But as you wait, you have to determine, what do I believe about this time that I'm in? As I'm waiting, what do I believe? Why does that matter? Because what I believe determines how I respond. As we look at the life of Joseph, what you're going to see is that he did not just haphazardly act and respond. He had a belief that determined his behavior. And in his waiting, he didn't stray from that. And as a result, he didn't fall into these pits. He didn't fall into a pit of depression and despondency. He didn't fall into a pit of throwing up his hands and saying, well, I mean, this is just it. This is the end, and just giving up. He didn't fall into a pit of bitterness and blaming his brothers and saying, this is this person's fault, because he believed something different about that. Well, what was it he believed? He believed that his life was always in the hand of his Creator. And as a result of that, he was okay with waiting. My challenge to you today is this. Are you learning to be okay with waiting? Are you learning to be okay with the uncertainty? And not just intellectually giving assent to that, saying, oh yeah, sure, but believing it. Do you act like it in your life as you move through these days and these times that are uncertain? I want to challenge you in the link of the description. In the description, there's going to be a link to a video called Seasons by Hillsong. I want you to listen to it. If you can even open up 2 windows and listen to it while you're reading the words. It's a beautiful song, talks about this idea that God wants to do awesome things in your life, but it demands that you wait. And so you've got to learn to be content with the waiting, because that is how the greatest growth comes in your life. Students, I want to see, and I believe God wants to see, great things from your life. He wants to do great things in your life. But it demands that we all learn to wait patiently on God, and in the waiting, be content. And not fall into some of these traps and fall into some of these pits, but holding to this belief that God has my attention and He has my hope. God bless you guys. I hope you have a great week.